joined by Coach Justin Harris today. Very excited about that as well. Just a little bit about Justin before we get started. So, Justin was a D1 scholarship runner, professional triathlete, has coached both at the collegiate level as well as working with Team USA in preparation for the Olympics. So, a fairly accomplished fellow. Did I miss anything, Justin?
No, you covered it, but I work with bobsled athletes, so little different thing.
Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story, Justin. It's fine.
Okay,
They're
there we
running
go.
as well out there.
They are sprinting.
And in addition to all of those tremendous accolades, one of the most important things we have coming up here is that Justin is about to take hold of our upcoming run challenges here for a bit and is going to be your leader and captain for the spring run challenge starting here at the top of April. So very excited about that. I think it'll be awesome to get a different viewpoint, hear a little bit about different stuff, and we're going to kickstart that today. So I'm excited because everyone is very familiar at this point, if you've been around for a while, how I approach the 20-minute distance test, how I approach the kind of the taper weeks leading into a half marathon. We're going to talk about both of those things because I think they'll be relevant and kind of get a different take on it, which I'm very excited about. So, speaking of which, I'm going to start with the winter run challenge. So, everyone in each of our programs at some point has taken the 20-minute distance test, or they certainly should have by now. And so the winter run group is going into their final week, so the 20-minute distance test looming. And so, Justin, I wanted to kind of ask, any tips for race week in general? Things to do, things to avoid, etc. So, race week tips.
Yeah. First, thanks for the introduction, and for these challenges and stuff, I look to continue to grow it like you have done, and you've done an awesome job. So stand on the shoulder of giants here. So excited for the opportunity. No, but really, I mean, you've developed something awesome, and it's really cool to see the community and stuff. So I don't take this new responsibility lightly. So thanks for creating it, doing it, and spearheading it. So race week, yeah. So don't need to recreate the wheel here. Race week for me, what I'm really focusing on with myself and with my clients is, I think the old adage is don't try anything new, right? Like if sometimes you read something in a taper week or like this is a good taper workout, and I would say, you're not defined by any single one workout. And when we get into race week, I talk to people about like, you can't do much to make it better, but you can do very easily make it way worse, right? So by adding on too much, or cutting back a ton, like some people are like, oh, it's race week, like recovery is the most important thing. And while it is, as we're unloading volume, I would say we want to kind of keep with the same structure, right? We're just reducing going in. So just, kind of tread lightly with trying anything new. Hopefully you've tried out your shoes before in a workout or something like that. Whatever gear you're going to race in. Sometimes this time of the year, like maybe you're training in a warm weather climate and going to somewhere cold, or you've been working out on the treadmill and now it's a little bit cooler outside, or the conditions are a little bit challenging. So I go with like, you always can have an extra layer and take it off. I'd rather be a little bit warmer. But the biggest thing for me during race week is a lot of people want to just skip to the race. Like, oh, I'm nervous and I'm anxious and I just want to get to the race. And to me, I would say you're missing out on the last couple workouts, which are the mental side of things, right? Starting to visualize races, which is really important, to like think about what the experience is going to be like, right? If it's your first half marathon ever, that might be challenging, right? But you can try your best to imagine what the scenario is like. You've talked to people before, you've done some of the training. You can think about one of maybe your longer long runs and what that went like. And so I tell people like, this is the last little bit. These are the last little workouts. Focus on the mental side. Some people, I don't know, where's your stance on when you visualize? Do you visualize the perfect case scenario, or do you also visualize like problem solving or hiccups that would come up?
Always the perfect case scenario.
Yeah. Okay.
And I
So
pretty much usually visualize like the final mile. It's like for me, I think about like coming past the final aid station, like crazy strong, and see like that's what I visualize like my final mile. I would say that my kick, but I don't have a kick, so just staying strong over the fat, like final little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, so, there's definitely 2 sides of the fence, right? There's the, like, imagine the perfect thing, because I feel like too many people imagine, like, oh, everything that possibly could go wrong, and that's not
Mhm.
gonna be helpful either, right? So, I definitely agree with you on that side of, visualize perfect case scenario, and you're not talking about the whole race, and I would agree with you, like, the end is, like, giving your best effort, because even if things didn't go perfect, right? You still have an opportunity to give it your best effort, right? And if you cross the line with your best effort, you could be a little frustrated how it went. Go back to the drawing board or whatever it is. But if you give up in the middle of the race or towards the end of the race and be like, it's not going how I want, and throw a little temper tantrum, inside, your head or something, then like you didn't see it all the way through, right? So you always give your best effort. And as my dad used to say, did you try as hard as you can? Yes. Okay, then you did everything that you could. I would say to add into it a little bit is kind of problem solving some, like visualizing some scenarios, like as far as like, okay, if someone moves past you slowly, what are you going to do, right? Like, and I think a lot of people today race with music in their ears. This is the omnipotent, all-knowing, thing right here, and this is
Yep.
telling what the truth is, and we know, like, there's some errors here, especially when we get into bigger cities. But my thing is like to use people through races, right? Like if I'm in a group, it's much easier to be in a group than by running by myself. So I
Agreed.
try to get people to visualize a little bit of, like people passing you and like going with them, because if you visualize it and it's going to be a little bit painful, and you can kind of roll with them or go with that group, as long as the group is moving by you a little bit slowly, if it's flying past you, just let them go, right? But at the end of the race, seeing this, because then when it happens in the race, like we're not sitting there for, you know 30 seconds, 60 seconds, and like hemming and hawing. We've kind of like made some of these decisions, visualizing aid stations, going through what that's going to look like, how to take your gels, where you're putting stuff, right? Like, so different things along those natures. So those are kind of the two big things: is try not to do anything new, and then to
Mhm.
work on visualizing, because that's the last bit of work to do.
Yeah, I love it on the visual. So the winter run group going into 20-minute test, they've got a little like tune-up run to start the week, then things back off and get a little bit easier. And
Yeah.
I those tune-up runs for me are the real sweet spot for that. It's like you're hitting a high pace, you're running hard, but the workout's much shorter. And so like
Mhm.
really think about like what that feeling is like. And
Yeah.
so in that kind of same vein, and I'm sure you've talked about this in different capacities between running tests, FTP tests, etc. But the 20-minute test that sort of like ends our winter run challenge here. I'd be interested to hear because you've done the 20-minute run test. I remember, posted about it on social. So, I have a strategy that I would say, like, I know Matt has a way that he kind of coaches these things sometimes, but I'd be really interested to hear, like, what your approach would be, and maybe for you personally, about like how you would attack a 20-minute distance test.
Yeah, so they can be daunting. 20-minute, going really hard for 20 minutes is very challenging, right? Um, I find step number one for me is just like going with open eye, like open, kind of being open and vulnerable, right? Because if we go in with expectations like I want it to be X, like 20% better than what I did, right? Like sometimes we throw out some arbitrary values and we're setting ourselves up for failure. So I say, I really try to go into any race or hard workout like as open and vulnerable as possible, to give it my best effort, right? Like I'm going to go in and give it my best effort and see where I'm at. And then I would say next is to like not associate my whole identity around an FTP test, which is very hard for everyone in cycling, and a 20-minute test, right?
Yeah.
Is, I'm not my SAT score, like back in the day. Like, I'm not my 5K time. Like I happen to run these things. So I joke about it, but I think it's really important because people shy away from these harder efforts because they don't want to be disappointed. Like they know they've lost fitness or they were sick in the middle or at an impromptu time. And so this aspect of like, it's just to see where you're at, right? And life is life, man. Like sometimes you don't go as much better as you think. The hope is that we do. Sometimes it's like, okay, like given these snafus, you know, I gave it my best effort, and I only lost 1% from getting sick for 2 weeks or whatever it is, right? So just being
Right.
open and vulnerable, I think, is important. When I go in personally, I mean, I've done quite a. I mean, it's been a long time since I've raced really hard in some of the shorter distances. So I went into that test. I did it on a treadmill, and I kind of broke it up into like I like to break things into like thirds or fours. So I broke it up into four 5 minute kind of like mental blocks. Had zero pacing in my mind because it's been a long while. Um, I find that sometimes if you like undercut yourself and go too easy, like you're not going to get the maximum. You're going to have like too much to give at the end. I find if I set like people set an arbitrary number, like, oh, I expect this, and then you really fade at the end, that's not going to be an accurate number either. So I kind of go in with the first 5 minutes of like something that is challenging but manageable. uh, it's like I'm like I know I'm capable of for this for 20 minutes. Then the next 5 minutes, it's like okay, I adjust where I'm at and I try to like tune it up a little bit. And I'm trying to get to 10 minutes, like feeling like okay, like I'm like at 10 minutes, I don't feel like I'm comfortable, but I don't feel like I'm absolutely dying. I feel like I'm definitely pushing some effort in. The next 5 minutes is like kind of hold on, like I try to really, it's like, oh, I'm only halfway through. It starts to get mental. I'm like, no, just focus on getting to 15 minutes in the best, like best place I possibly can. And then the last 5 minutes is that's my ego. That's all ego, man. It's like, how tough am I? It has nothing to do with pace. It simply has to do everything with like, can I suffer for 5 minutes? Like I've trained so hard. You guys have done 8 weeks of stuff. You've done tons of workouts. You've gone hard. You've gone slow. You've gone
Yeah.
like mental. Like you've done all this stuff. So that last 5 minutes is like, how tough can you be? Right. And I can suffer for 5 minutes and then it's done. Right. And I always find a little bit extra there. And so I break it up into 4 or 5 minute bouts. But it's not easy, man. I was humbled.
So it's funny. It makes me think of you were talking about visualization. I really like mantras in those moments. So
Mm,
it
yeah.
was New York City Marathon a handful of years ago. I've shared my mantra, I've given people a chuckle a few times. Where I remember being like mile 21, 22. Pretty well starting to hurt. And I was fading. I realized I was like 5 miles from the finish. I started thinking about the like thousands of miles I had run to like get there, and just the fact I had to wake up at 3:30 in the morning to get to the stupid start of the race. And I was like, I gotta put it together for 30 more minutes, man. Like I literally was like, I got all dressed up for this. I have nothing else to do today, and for the rest of the race was like, I got all dressed up for this.
Yeah.
All dressed up for this.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean it's whatever it takes to kind of because our brain will go to the totality of it, right? Like, oh, this is really hard, right? And sometimes it's called chunking, right? We got to zoom down to like the most like tangible piece that we can execute. And so early on, it's like patience. In the middle, it's like, hey, just click these off, like get to the next aid station or get to the next minute, right? And at the
Yep.
very end, it's like I said, I've always gone ever since I was a kid. It's just like how tough can I be in the last 3 minutes? Like, can I hang on here? Because everyone's brain, everyone from the people setting world records, everyone is saying like, is this too fast? Can we hang on? Is this person going to pass you? Like, am I going to fall off the back of the treadmill? Which, are people staring at me because I'm flinging sweat everywhere? Like, but you just chunk down to, how hard can I go? And
Fair.
you give it your best effort. So yeah, they're not easy. Okay. So
They are not easy, but I think you hit on a great point. One of the reasons they've been such a staple is, you know, you, you do it when you're not ready. You do it when you are ready, and you keep going back and like practicing this hard exercise. And at the time in which it's really meaningful to you, when you're running a race, when you're doing something that's genuinely challenging, you're much more prepared. Like you got to practice these experiences because there's a skill to the racing, a skill to the testing as well. So that's
yep,
hence the test still remaining in place here.
yep, absolutely.
So we switch a little bit, and I got to be honest, maybe I should have gone the other way, but half marathoners are going into a bit of a taper now. So they're about 2 weeks out. They've got one final their big long run this weekend, one kind of say final workout top of next week. But obviously, I can't remember if you've got. Oh yeah, you've got people over in Tokyo, so you're
Mhm.
just coming through taper periods with those athletes. Certainly,
Yep.
you've tapered. Any taper tips for the people who are about to enter that period
Yeah.
in going into the half marathon here in 2 weeks?
Yeah, I would say it starts with this like like the bigger like the last long run. I
Mhm.
feel like a lot of people tend to think that hey, I want to like try to run the pace I'm going to run, and yeah, it's not good. I tell people it's a good opportunity to practice pre-race breakfast, your nutrition strategy throughout, and then just get the miles in, right? Because the work is kind of it's really done, and we're just kind of like trying to like hit a note that's going to resonate long enough to the race, right? And so just be careful there. All right, 2 weeks. It, yeah, my tips are is like your body has become, if you're really consistent, your body has literally become addicted to the amount of training you had been doing. All right. So when we start cutting back, it's addicted to the amount of work, the training hours, mileage, frequency, whatever it is that you've been doing. And it's used to that, like the hormonal bump that we get, human growth hormone, testosterone from training, and then all the neurotransmitters, epinephrine, serotonin, dopamine, all those good feelings, right? So it's addicted. It's like jonesing for all this stuff, right? And then we go in and we just give it a little bit, and it's like, yo, man, like I want, like, give me the goods, right? So this is where we have to use our prefrontal cortex, like our logic of like, okay, like we're not primal animals here. We got to like just like take our time to allow your body to really absorb all the training you're doing so that you have the best opportunity to like give your best effort during the race, right? And so we call it like it's not deconditioning, but it's like we're on circadian rhythms as humans, right? And so these circadian rhythms like start like getting off sync a bit, and so it, I've heard it said to me one time, it's like called down regulation, and so like everything feels off. Like one day you might be a little extra grumpy, one day taper tantrum, right? One day I might feel amazing and I just want the race to be today. One day, one moment I might crave sugar, or like the next moment I'm like not hungry at all. So just know that all these like differences that are happening is just your body preparing for something like that, the challenge that you've trained for, right? And so this is why I say the last bit is people want to skip things, and I'm like, just this is now the mental work to go back and in your files in your brain of like look at the hard workouts, look at the miles you did, kind of double click on that folder of like what did I do, like mentally, like, oh yeah, that was a time I didn't think I was capable. And that's where we kind of build the confidence. Say the biggest mistake people make in tapers is they're searching for confidence before the race, and they leave the race out on the 2 weeks prior to the race. So that would be my advice for dealing with tapers.
Yeah, and I'd be curious. What I see a lot. I think it happens a lot in the marathon and the half marathon as well, of course, though. But is as that taper starts to become effective, you start to see people's easy paces drift higher, and like the workouts get a little bit harder because they're better rested.
Mhm.
And I, just throw in like that would be one thing. As a coach, I'm certainly very cognizant of looking at people in taper period. It's like don't make the easy workouts harder because you have more energy. They were supposed to be easier on purpose, and you want to save this energy until your actual race day.
Yeah, that's a great point. I talk about density. Like when we plan a workout, we want it to be like this certain density, like volume and intensity. And if I'm cutting you back and then you go faster, then you made it as dense as it once was like a couple weeks ago. And it's like, that's not the point. So this is what I'm saying is like, to piggyback on that is just like we want to hold all that in, all that good stuff of all that energy, all that excess, because I see that mistake too. It's like, well, I felt good. I was just flowing. I'm like, you stare at your watch 24/7 when runs aren't going well. I know you're looking at this thing and it's telling you paces that you just make you feel good. And the more you feel good before the race, you're just spending the money that you're gonna like. You're basically spending all the money that you put in the bank before we get to the actual race. So now instead of starting with like the budget we train for, now you have a less budget because you're using enough just because you're not patient enough, you're not confident enough, right? So, absolutely a great point is you should be feeling better, at least more energy. I find sometimes with my stuff, I tell people I wish I could sprinkle the magic dust on them to make every run feel good as they're tapering. But myself and some of my training, like people don't feel amazing, and I'm like, just on race day, you'll be where you need to be. It's okay because we still do a little bit of intensity, and they're like, well, I didn't feel as good as I expected, and it's like, it's you just need to get the hit, right? We need to get the little bump. Okay, so
It never does.
never.
Well, let's jump into a couple questions here. A few questions. I'm actually going to invert it from what I had
Yep.
planned. I think so. We're going to
Okay.
start with because I see Christy's here. She asked this question, so we'll answer it for her here, which is not to throw you under the bus because it was asked in third party, but name was associated anyway. So let's say one has marathon this spring. Let's say. What's the most responsible way to build off of this training for that absolutely hypothetical situation? So to rephrase it a little bit here is just, Justin, I would talk about like how, if you had a half marathon in 2 weeks and you're using that to build to a spring marathon, how would you sort of use this training and sort of like springboard off of the half, to like kind of the final prep for a full?
Yeah. So we were talking about this a little bit before we got on the call. I think we both kind of came to the conclusion is like what like is the marathon the kind of more the A race or is the half marathon more the A race? And I would say it's tough to make a marathon like a B race, just because of the distance. But
Yeah.
some people do, and so I'll give Christy the benefit of the benefit of the doubt, hypothetically, of her situation. But to me, the marathon is probably like using the half to build, right? And so uh, my first recommendation, and this is what we both of our recommendation is to kind of like maybe pull back in the half in the race a little bit, so that you can kind of get back to training a little bit more quickly to continue building your long runs and such, which is the high priority, right? So when I'm in marathon builds and people are like, "Well, I have a half, like I have a half in the middle of it," and I'm like, "We're not racing it." And they're like, "Wait, what do you mean?" And it's like I'm putting my foot down because in a marathon training plan, we're often walking a tightrope with like capacity, right? Time, training, mileage, recovery, absorbing the training, nutrition. There's so much that we're walking this tightrope. And so if we go into race, to me, a half marathon, like I have people back off, training for like a week and a half to 2 weeks to really absorb the race, right? Like if we really think about like a workout being like a big stimulus, like a race is the some of our biggest stimuli of the year, and a marathon is really big and a half is pretty big too. So we have to recover from that. So if you go out and end up racing it, I've done this with people, it's like, hey, we're going to recover and not worry about the other stuff because I need to make sure that you're ready to get back to training. So we might not get the long run to be as long as maybe you want because you ended up racing it. All right. If you're more concerned about your long runs, I would say treat the race as a high end long run where we're a little bit more progressive. And if you really want to race, I tell people, I've had people race like you can go rip the last 5K. Like everything else is like smooth building, and then you go rip the last 5K, and then you felt like you did something, and it felt good, but it was only it wasn't as dense as an entire race of racing. So, um, do you have anything to add to that, like that you would do?
No, I think that's about it. Yeah, I always the like terminology, and I guess maybe it just associates with the way that I think about it. Is like it's an intra. It becomes an intra like training cycle race. So you need to train. I have an athlete in the middle of it this week. He's doing Napa half on his way to Boston, and
Yeah.
so he's like 5 weeks out from Boston, and so he did a workout on Tuesday, and we're going to give him one single session off to kind of taper for the weekend.
Mhm.
He is under instruction to race hard, but he's hard enough that he can do another workout on Tuesday.
Yeah.
That's the amount of time off, and so with that, it's a little bit different expectation. Like his legs should not be rested when he hits the starting line because he's been working hard in the week, and he's certain. You have to kind of judge what it takes out of you too. Like
Yeah.
when working with certain athletes, like I'll have them at 18, 20 miles in their marathon build at week like 2 or 3 of training. Like in a perfect world, that's where I like it. But you have to have an athlete that's like incredibly capable of that high mileage for a sustained period of time. Um, And so, but the point being, it's just, yeah, it's part of your training week. So for in a lot of instances like that, I'll certainly use it as a workout. As Justin said, a lot of times I like doing it like a progression run. Like we're gonna start easy, and then you're gonna kick up to marathon pace, and you might like finish the final 5K hard. But no, I think that's all great advice because the name of the game is you need it to set you back for like small amount of time as possible and be immediately right back into your training cycle. And if it goes too hard, if the taper is too long, you start to actually lose fitness, and you do lose fitness in a taper. Sorry, that is like should it's why I like shorter tapers than longer tapers. You lose fitness, but you're kind of making the bet that you are fresher legs like compensate significantly more. So it's a very small amount, but if the taper is too long and then the recovery is long, and all of a sudden you're looking at 3, 4 weeks of down training to get in one race, that's not a great trade in a marathon cycle. But yeah, let's jump to the next question here. So I am running my first marathon in November and plan to start training in June. I have a half marathon May 4th. Any advice on how to train in between the half and when I start training for the full? So once again, I'm gonna slightly rephrase this, but I like the question. I think it's a cool opportunity, and it will resonate with a lot of people. Which is got 8 weeks off. We'll call it 6 to 8 weeks, but for sake of conversation, let's say you've got 8 weeks off. A little bit of an off season between like endurance cycle A, endurance cycle B. What are you doing with that time period? And I'm very interested to hear actually.
So like between his half in May and then starting training, right?
Yeah, we'll call
Yeah.
it like middle of
Yeah,
June.
middle of June. Okay, yeah. Oh yeah, because November. Yeah, yeah. So I've used this. Well, when my clients have discussions with me about which races they're signing up for, which space things out a little bit more, is except and instead of ones are like, oh, I'm doing all these, and I'm like, well, like we're gonna have to, use ones as training rounds or whatever. But saying that the May one is like an A race, like they've been training and whatnot, we're going to rip it, right? Like we're going to run as fast as we can because, you know, we really want athletes to have like a profile, right? Like a range of races, like and experiences, right? Because 5Ks help, teach you like how to really push, whereas marathons teach you how to endure, right? And then halves are somewhere not quite in the middle between a 5K and whatever, but a marathon. But they have different qualities that we need to have. A half marathon, you're kind of on it for a while and you're more steady, right? So at the end of the day, we're going for it and we're racing. Like I said, I call it like post race super boost, where we have 2 weeks post half where we're biking a bit, taking a couple of days off. We'll get to a run later in the week one, and then week two we get back into a little bit more rhythm, but like way less intensity. We'll run a couple more times, and this is really for like tendon health. It takes like someone 7-10 days for the tendon to heal. So like you perceive your muscles like ouch, they're sore. I feel it walking around. Then they're like tired, and then you're like we're good to go. And it's like the tendons you can't perceive, your Achilles tendon, your hip, plantar fascia, hamstring tendon, like in certain attachment points. And this is where people just get back into it. And then 6 weeks later, they're like, oh, I got plantar fasciitis or IT band syndrome. And it's like, well, this really was like how you came off the race. So I focus a lot on let's recover and absorb the race because then you'll get a performance bump, right? Super compensation. So like after we get back into it, not right away, but it's usually like 6 to 8 weeks post race. If we absorb the training and backed off, then we have higher fitness. And that kind of times to like, okay, now we're getting back into training and now we're focused. Hey, we're on our marathon build. So for me, it's being really patient, which is hard for people. I want to get back into running that time of the year, and at least in north of the Mason-Dixon line is, it's primo running weather. It's nice. It's not too humid yet. You guys down south, it's already brutally hot, and I don't feel that good because we suffered all along. So I'm trying to really recover off the half and then incrementally get people back into the training rhythm without forcing things. So that's my main objective. A secondary objective would be like if we're having some response, like we've recovered, if we have more like 6 to 8 weeks, I will work on some capacity that we will need for the marathon. And so some of my clients are like good with volume. It's like, hey, let's just hit a couple more faster, shorter reps, like something that we might not get too much of in the marathon build. But most people, I'll give them like maybe a 2 or 3 week build of like a higher volume block where we get a little bit of exposure and it was tough. And then I ease off the week before any kind of training plan. Like let's back off, and then we don't slam into training plans. We continue to build and progress like a crescendo to the race. So I'm focusing mostly on getting people to recover and getting back in rhythm. And then if we have time for it, I'm not stuffing it in. A lot of people are like, well, I want to get higher volume before I get into the build, and I'm like, we'll see how your body responds, right? We don't know. So those are my two main focal points for someone kind of in those in between is first recover, don't rush back to running, then get back into your rhythm, and then see where you're at.
Cool. So in general, you kind of take a little bit of a down cycle and kind of slow
Yeah,
build back up. So
yeah,
proper recovery, slow build to like reestablish the baseline to kickstart off the
the
marathon.
basics. Yeah, I go back to basic workouts, minute on, minute off, speed plays, progression runs. Like I like come back to every facet of the workouts, come back to the very basic, and we recycle again. It can get a little, for some people, it can get boring. So I have to, read the room. But for their body is like, I think rhythm and continuity is so important because we want to do all these dynamic training and stuff, but it's really hard to like when you're doing very different training than you once were. So like in my plans, like 5K to marathon is quite similar. It's just what are we tuning up?
Mm.
Like how much volume are we really tuning up is like kind of the difference. And so that when people like I want to shift to 5K, it's not like this whole different plan where they have to like now recalibrate to like how should I feel at this point in time. They kind of know like off a progression run I feel like X. When I do higher volume I feel like Y. And that comparison allows for confidence, right? Is kind of where I get to. So, but this isn't the concept of like we built all winter and spring for like a May A race, and then November is like the next A race, and so we've spread out our two A events uh, that they're away from each other a little bit. So I do believe in a little bit of a downtime as well. Like some people, I might like, hey, we're going to take a a couple days off, like half a week off, just to really recover because you've been going since December. So anyway.
Fair, fair,
Yeah.
fair, fair. Well, we're gonna do one more question and let everybody get to their Friday evening. Question being, I know experienced runners have a plan going into their races. Any tips or tricks regarding making a plan to begin with and then remembering it along the way?
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really interesting question because
It is an interesting question, right?
part of me assumes everyone has a plan, like some idea of what they want to do, uh, but clearly not, and I think that's okay. But I think having a plan is like necessary. So I'm not trying to make the person upset, but like maybe I'm just more a careful person. But like you absolutely want to have a plan. But here's the thing that I would really associate with it is or really like double click on is like all my plans are quite flexible to a certain point, right? So I would say is people are like, oh, like X happened and I couldn't do it. And I'm like, well, the whole point of like doing this is to like learn how to problem solve, right? Like, endurance is like a metaphor for life. Like if you're just, bullnosing and trying to like, I'm just going there. Um, we miss the forest for the trees a bit. Like we make mistakes early on in races. Like, if it's like warmer than you thought and you're like, well, I'm staying on pace and then you blow to pieces, like you didn't take in any information. And then I feel like I didn't teach you. So I would say have a plan. And I would say, uh, be flexible in certain areas. So if it's hotter than you thought, like you got to pull back and make adjustments. Like Boston last year, it was really warm for Boston. And um, I really pushed all my clients to like, hey, we got to pull back. Like people aren't going to pull back because it's Boston, YOLO. We're going to full send it. And people ran 10 to 15 minutes, some 20 off of what they were trying to run because it was so hot. And I think everyone ran within 1 minute. I think I was lucky on my predictions and plan. But it was like I really emphasize you have to ease into the race and figure out what's going on. So Weather's a place where you're going to want to adjust. If you don't know the course and the terrain, like if you're experiencing more hills, like you can't be stubborn on pace. So I would say focus. I really try to get people to build a plan on effort because that's truly the only thing you can control. Right? If you're ignoring your effort, you're in for trouble. And in our training, we try to give people like, hey, smooth, strong, steady, right? These type of concepts other than just pace. Because if you only focus on pace, you're going to get in trouble. If you only focus on heart rate, you're going to get into trouble in some way, maybe too conservative. Um, Really, effort is the one that we're really trying to dial in and to make sure. So set a plan on effort. I would say be progressive through the race and then make adjustments where necessary. So don't have a tight range and say, hey, I'm going to average 10:30 pace or 12-minute pace. Like that's what I'm going to average. So I'm going to try to run 12-minute pace for as long as I can. I'm going to say start off a little slower, see how you're feeling, ease into it, and then have more at the end to make some decisions there. So a plan based on effort, make adjustments based on weather and terrain and crowd. Like I had a plan. Berlin was the biggest race at the time, and everyone was like stuck. Like they couldn't move, and then all the aid stations are only on one side of the road, so the whole race has to like come over, and it was just like chaos. And so you have to problem solve, And so I would say have a loose plan, try to stick to it the best you can, but be flexible throughout. And I would say be more conservative early on than you need to be sometimes. It pays
Yeah.
off. How about you?
It's just well, I was gonna say mostly just because I can't help myself from like kind of repeating my same beliefs over and over again. I, have told people on this group a thousand times my big belief on how you get better at this is by racing a lot.
Yeah.
You get your tail feathers outside, find a starting line, and that is how you learn to do it. Where you don't just show up and be good at it the first time. You don't even have any idea what the effort should feel like until
Yeah.
you do race pretty often.
Yeah.
And at that distance, like on a half marathon, it's like, how should I feel at mile 6? How should I feel at mile 8? How should I feel at 9, 10? Like,
Yeah.
unless you've done some similar races or similar types,
You're just guessing.
you're just guessing. And then you either you run the risk of being too fast and having a tough final 5K, or on the flip side, kind of a good problem to have sometimes. It's just like charging ahead. And like anytime I see, we look at a lot of data files, and I'll see someone approach the end of a workout, like the end of a race, and I can tell exactly when they see the finish line because I see the pace line go like shoo. And I'm
Yep.
like, if you had so much left in the tank that you went to like full sprint mode on the final tenth of a mile,
Yeah.
like we should have used that energy earlier in the race. But ultimately, it's just getting out there, racing a little bit more often. The tests help. I mean, that's
Yeah.
a huge impetus for why the tests are in these kind of general fitness training programs. It's like those are huge opportunities. They're just little mini B races along the way. So when you get to these places and you really want to have a well executed plan, you know where your effort's at and you know how to dial into it, like Justin said.
Yeah. It's a great point. Like, this is why effort is so hard to calibrate. Like you have to mess up a lot of times, like you went too far, you didn't go hard enough, right? And it's just like this is why I call it the triangle. Like effort's up here, pace and power over here, and heart rate's here, and it's a triangulation of trying to navigate like where are you at in a race. But like you don't know until you try, right? And trying a lot, and like Dana said, like it was like I have plan A, and then it's like, Muscle Man, 70.3, like 90 degrees, like getting off the bike. I had plan A, B, C, D, E, F. Like I was just like, but if you're stubborn to plan A, you're gonna blow up and end in the med tent, and that's not good either, right? So like I had a pace in mind, but I was like, I'm just gonna figure it out to 3K or 5K, and then I got to 5K, and I was like, I can't pick it up. I'm gonna take this to 10K. Let's see. I got to 10K. I'm like, I'm gonna have to wait to 10 miles. And I got to 10 miles. And I'm like, all right, well, it's enough. Like, and I almost didn't make it to the finish line. My hamstring started cramping up like 400 meters. And I'm like, yeah, if I would have, I would have been on a suicide mission. So be flexible, but race often. That's the only way you're gonna explore it. You can't learn Spanish only speaking it every now and then. You gotta be fluent in it. So if you're competing, if you end up racing, you're going to be more fluent with how your body works, and that's all we're really trying. So I think that was a great point. So,
That's
yeah.
it.
All
Well,
right, buddy.
Justin, thanks very much. This has been
Yep.
super helpful, super informative. Incredibly excited to bring you into the fold here. And to everybody watching, thanks so much for spending a little bit of time with us. And we'll be back here soon. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Later, everyone. Thanks, John.